We'll start our recording as well. Hi, everybody. Hi, Bill. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing well. It's great to be here.
Good.
Hanging in there. Thank you.
Hanging in there, right? It's like we just last night. So, Bill, this is something for you to know. We're slowly starting up our in-person event programming. So maybe the next book, you can come actually out here to San Diego and visit us. And Tiffany, you're here in San Diego with us too. So we started really tiptoeing into it. So last night was our first one, and we're hoping to do more safely, that is. But in the meantime, virtual Warwicks, I'm loving because we get to host you. Because Bill, where are you calling in from?
From the east end of Long Island, New York.
Okay. And Tiffany, you're here in San Diego, right?
I sure am in La Costa.
Yeah. So, okay. Oh, I'm in La Costa too, right off Levante.
We're neighbors.
Neighbors here. So hopefully we have some people from in between the country joining us. Got the coast covered. Just real quick, I'm just going to give Facebook a minute or two to notify everybody that we're live. Just a couple things about Warwicks and what's going to happen tonight. So my little sign there says 1896. We are celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. So while we are not the oldest bookstore in the country, we're the oldest continuously family-owned bookstore. So if you are located in La Jolla, San Diego area, so if you're in the area, we would love for you to come by and see us. We're going to do some celebrations in November, I think. So if you're in the area, or even if you're not, get on our email list, and there'll be chances to win gift cards and do some fun things for the anniversary celebration. So for tonight, I'm going to be putting Bill's book into the comment section. So when you click on that, you can do two things. We can ship it to you, but if you're in the San Diego area, why not choose to pick it up in the store, and you can come and look at all kinds of other things that are there at the store. Tiffany and Bill are going to chat for about 30 minutes or so. And then we always love customer questions and comments. So go ahead and pop those into the Facebook comment section as well. And I will filter those into Tiffany at about that 30-minute mark. So don't be shy and put those questions in. So let's get on with the show. Let me introduce you to, and then I will go away for a while. So Bill Schutt is a vertebrate zoologist and author of 5 nonfiction and fiction books, including the New York Times Editor's Choice Cannibalism, A Perfect Natural History. We were just talking about that in the green room. Be a good social distancing book to carry around with you. Recently retired from his post as professor of biology at LIU Post, he is a research associate at the American Museum of Natural History, where he has studied bats all over the world. His research has been featured in Natural History magazine, as well as in the New York Times, Newsday, The Economist, and Discover. He's here to talk to us today about his newest book, Pump, A Natural History of the Heart. And with him today is Tiffany Fox. Tiffany is Director of Communications at UC San Diego's Department of Surgery, as well as an award-winning public speaker. For more than a decade, she has helped researchers tell their research stories through articles, videos, and public presentations. She writes a weekly newsletter on research communications, Research Refined. Prior to coming to UC San Diego, Tiffany was a reporter and columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune for 10 years. She's a freelance journalist and has written about a multitude of topics spanning science, engineering, technology, and the arts. She has also traveled to 5 continents, is a certified yoga teacher, served in Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer, and is a mother of 2. With that, you two have a great conversation, and we'll see you when you're done.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Julie. It's really great to be here. I'm very excited to talk about this book. I was telling Bill that I was walking around town, walking up to people saying, guess what I learned today, and reading his book. It's packed with information, and we have a lot to cover. So let's get started with our first question, which is, Bill, why did you choose to write this book, and who did you write it for?
Well, I write all of my books. I guess you would call them popular science books. So they're not some of my favorite reviews start out with, this is not a textbook. And this was with my first book, Dark Banquet, about blood-feeding creatures, and then the second one, Cannibalism, and now a Pump, where I've taken a subject that is complex. It is sometimes misunderstood. It has a lot of, there's a lot going on here, whether you're talking about hearts or whether you're talking about cannibalism in the animal kingdom, in humans, with a great deal of history. And then I'm interested in what's taking place in as far as how it's related to medicine and the future. And so I've been able to sort of find finished cannibalism, I was like, all right, what other weird thing am I going to look at next? Because I like the macabre. I like to bring in some humor, make things entertaining. And when my agent Gillian McKenzie and my editors at Algonquin suggested that I go a bit more mainstream for this book, and they gave me a short list, and on that list was the heart. So I thought to myself, well, this has really got to have been done already. There were so many books written about the heart that I didn't think that I'd be able to go in and write the type of book that I wanted to write. And when I started to research it, I found out that I was completely wrong. So there were all the history of cardiac medicine and beliefs about the heart were, to me, blew me away. And at that point, I realized that there was so much here, and a lot of it is kind of strange, and that I could approach it humorously and in a fashion that wasn't always so serious, and teach a lot. So once I realized that, then it became a lot easier for me to dive in and learn about these things and talk to all of these incredible people and get out there and look at some of the animals and
Oh, sorry, Bill. I think we're having a little technical delay on my end. So it's glitching a bit. And if I missed something you said due to the glitch, my apologies, but I'll move on to the next question. My next question, given everything you just said, is how, the heart is so vast in its variances throughout the animal and human worlds. There's a lot you could have covered in this book. So how did you determine what to leave out of the book?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And this, I never meant to write an encyclopedia that I thought were the most interesting, the ones that were very different. When you're talking about animals without backbones, I believe the heart or a mechanism that pumps fluid like blood, or if you're an insect, you'd call it hemolymph, around the body. I think that's evolved many times in animals without backbones, in the invertebrates. Not so much with vertebrates. There are, once you get to the backboned animals, you have a two-chambered heart in fish, you have a three-chambered heart in amphibians and most reptiles, and then you have a four-chambered heart in crocodiles, birds, and mammals. One of the things I really wanted to emphasize was that we fall into this trap sometimes as humans of thinking that we have the pinnacle of everything. We have the pinnacle of a heart, or pinnacle of our liver works better than, and it's the evolutionarily the best that there is. And I wanted to show people that that's not necessarily the case. That the hearts, as simple as they may be for an animal like an earthworm or an insect, they do exactly what they need to do. They've evolved over millions of years to do the function about them as kind of, in the old days, it was me. Whenever we heard about the Neanderthal man, they were always like dragging their women around by their hair, and they had a club, and they were sort of hunched over. And that was the perception that people had about these humans as sort of failures, and they were stupid. But we know now that was just not the case. And so it was kind of a similar thing with this book, where I wanted to show you that there were all of these beautiful mechanisms out there, and there are a lot of cool stories. But I didn't necessarily have to tell every single story there to get that point across. And that was really, which was get this done.
Great. What your point about not feeling like we are the pinnacle of all species reminds me of when I was pregnant and went in to see my physician, and he told me I had a textbook uterus, and I walked around feeling proud the rest of the day. Us silly humans. So my next question is, I personally had a couple of favorite chapters of this book. I was definitely stunned by the chapter on Dr. Forsman, the physician who inserted a catheter into his own body to prove that it could be done to access the heart. I also loved the chapters on animals and your comparisons and contrasts. But I wonder, did you have a favorite chapter to research and write?
I guess I had two. And one of them, of course, was in the prologue, and in the first chapter, I talk about my friends at the Royal Ontario Museum in Ontario, in Toronto, and how they lucked out. There was this unfortunate event, and 9 blue whales died on the ice during a winter in 2014, and they were able to recover 3 of those whales that they washed up in these remote things that very little was known about the inside of these creatures, because they usually sink when they die. So that was something that was, to me, really interesting, because they didn't know a whole lot about that heart. They'd been getting questions like, what's the largest heart in the world? And they would respond, well, the blue whale heart. How big is it? It's as big as an SUV. But they really didn't know. And so when they got the opportunity to go and salvage these hearts, or one of them at least, it was a massive whale, separating the ribs, cutting the heart out and pushing it out. And then when they recovered the heart, it didn't look like a typical mammalian heart. To me, when I looked at the photos, it looked like a giant, a 400-pound soup dumpling. And there were so many things about it that they did, it collapsed. If you had a heart like a sheep heart from a butcher or something like that, and you laid it on a table, it would sit there, when it would have structure. This thing collapsed. And so it was built completely differently. 4 chambers, it's a mammal heart. But we think that, or they think that, and its organs withstand when they dive to tremendous depths. So instead of being stressed out by this pressure, the heart simply collapses when they deep dive. So it took 5 years to preserve this. They had to use hundreds and hundreds of gallons of formaldehyde, which is something that, when we were working in labs, we'd worry if a little bit of it got splashed on us. And these guys were worried about falling into vats of it.
Wow.
So they wound up sending this 400-pound heart, after they preserved it, and so that it wouldn't rot, to you've seen the bodies exhibit, where they strip the skin off of cadavers, and you've got people posed, and you can see their muscles, and they're bouncing basketballs or whatever they're doing, swimming.
Mhm.
So that's what they did with this. It was the largest project that this group in Germany had undertaken. And when it came back to Canada, there were blood vessels coming off this that they didn't know what they did, but they were able to look inside this heart. It was beautifully colored. But the big surprise there, and this is the thing that intrigued me, exhibition, they had it posed next to a mini car rather than an SUV, and it was more sort of the golf cart sized rather than Ford Bronco or whatever. And so the thought behind that sort of makes sense from a biological viewpoint, is that if you look at something like a hummingbird, where its wings are beating 800 times per minute, and that takes a lot of energy, and a lot of nutrients and oxygen are being supplied to those muscles. Well, in order to get that oxygen and nutrients to the 1,250 beats per minute, and we think that's about the physical limit. If you think of the heart as a machine, it's a pump that has to fill and then pump out. And whether you're dealing with a heart or a pump, it's probably right at the physical limit of what this thing can do. So if you want to get more blood to the wing muscles, you can pump faster, But if you hit your limit there, then the only other way to get more blood to those structures, to those muscles, is to have a larger heart. So every time it beats, it pumps more blood. So you find that animals like animals with high metabolic rates have a much larger heart relative to the size of their body than something like a blue whale, which, its heart maybe beats 10, 15 times a minute, and it doesn't have those high metabolic demands. So to me, I thought that was, that was great. So that was the animal chapter that really grabbed me. But when I walked away from the book after the edits and everything were done, the story that kept coming back to me was Baby Faye, and that procedure that was done to transplant a baboon heart into a desperately ill and that's really the story that I think is so incredibly intriguing, very really tragic on a personal level for the mother and for the relatives and for the doctors and everyone involved in that. But to me, there was a real positive there, because it opened up the media coverage back then was so strong that that a lot of donor hearts came in after that for infants. The awareness that he had to transplant a baboon heart into this infant, and this is Dr. Leonard Bailey and Loma Linda. And so then come in, and he did 300 of these infant heart transplants successful, and never had to do a baboon heart again. And then the heart defects that this baby had, they could go in now and do the surgery to take care of that. They didn't have to transplant a heart. So those were the main things. That's what I think about now as what really grabbed me.
Yes, and those chapters were particularly striking. There's a lot of emotion built into this book too, which I appreciated. In fact, one thing that you made me aware of that I wasn't previously aware of is the plight of the horseshoe crab community. I had no idea that there are some controversial things happening in terms of using horseshoe crab. I don't want to use the word blood because it's not blood, but why don't you fill us in on the latest on that?
Okay. So horseshoe crabs, you guys have got them on the Pacific coast as well, I guess, right? And you see them come in the late spring, early summer from the deep to shallows, and that's where they mate. And they climb up on the shore. They lay their eggs in water that is going to be uncovered covered at high tide, but uncovered at low tide. And it's all a matter of the temperature that these eggs are going to be at. But they are. But in this case, these are really prime examples of a living fossil, because they looked exactly the same 500 million years ago.
Mhm.
So 250 million years before the first dinosaur, these creatures look like they do now.
Amazing.
And everybody's familiar with them. They sort of look like a helmet with a sharp, pointy little tail. And about 30 years ago, well, in the old days, they were harvested by the millions for fertilizer, and then for commercial fishermen that fished for eels and fished for whales, big shell and snaily looking guy, and so they found that chopped up horseshoe crabs made great bait. So there were problems that way. But about 30 years ago now, a researcher came up with the fact that these horseshoe crabs have a cell in their blood, which is blue, which is a completely different story. I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with the Statue of Liberty, why the Statue of Liberty is blue. But he found out that they have these cells called amoebocytes, and that the amoebocytes release this substance when the horseshoe crab comes into contact with some really nasty bacteria. So there's this big long list of gram-negative bacteria, Escherichia, and things like that disease-causing pathogenic bacteria. And when this substance, which is called factor C, comes into contact with these bacteria, it forms a wall around them. So it clots around them. So what this researcher determined is that these bacteria, in a let's say a clinical situation where you're sterilizing equipment, you're sterilizing catheters, you're sterilizing medicine that you're going to be giving, the bottles you don't want bacteria in there when you're bottling things. When you're involved in that sterilization process and you're killing that bacteria release a toxin. And it's nothing that they release, because they're releasing the stuff to fight off a predator or whatever, but it's part of their cell structure. And when you destroy that cell, these substances are released. And if they get into the human bloodstream, and they fall into this big heading of endotoxin or lipopolysaccharide, and they cause a serious and sometimes deadly reaction in humans. High fevers and so this substance can now be, once they figured this out and that there was a way to make money from it, and that it replaced this old test where they used rabbits to test for endotoxin. So then horseshoe crabs began to be collected on an industrial scale and bled. They hang them upside down. They stick a needle into their hearts, their circulatory systems, and they drain this blue blood into a bottle until it stops draining into the bottle. Then by law, they need to bring these crabs back and put them into the same water. And they're being transported in the back of pickup trucks. So they're not in water. They're not kept cool. You're draining 40% of the blood from this creature, and then you're dumping it back in the water. A lot of these animals die. And so that is a real problem. And so a lot of people who are conservation minded have this real concern now that these animals may go extinct. So the good news is that they have developed through DNA technology, they've developed a test now that doesn't require horseshoe. But then when COVID came around, that sort of got pushed to the back burner. And so they went back to this tried and true test that was sold by a number of companies. So we're hoping that when things calm down, that this test that doesn't use horseshoe crab blood will be the test that everyone uses in the future. And the other bit of good news is that the folks at Cornell Cooperative Extension and Cornell University have developed an artificial scent that smells like a chopped up horseshoe crab. And they're now divvying that on horseshoe crabs to attract their eels and their whelks. So there is some hope that we won't be using as many of these animals in the near future.
I'm really glad to hear that. I never expected to have a soft spot for horseshoe crabs after reading this book, but there were lots of surprises in store. So one of them, I wouldn't say it's surprising, since in popular science, there is a tendency to use humor and illustrations. Your book is illustrated as well. Anecdotes, metaphors to tell stories. And in your book, you've done that to tell the story of the natural history of the heart. So I have a two-part question for you. Question one is, why is it important to use these techniques when writing about science for a general audience? And the second part of the question, I'll remind you if you forget, is this is a kind of creativity, a creative writing style that we almost never overtly see in peer-reviewed scientific publications. I'm talking about journals, scientific journals and papers that are published by the scientific community. Although one could argue that this technique does a better job of communicating science to a wider audience. So do you think that type of narrative style that you use in Pump, this really playful, accessible style, has any place in rigorous academic publications?
When I first met you, I told you I thought that was a great question, and I'd never heard it before. Let me answer the first part of the question, and I think this has to do with the fact that as a college professor for the last 22 years, that taught anatomy and physiology, and it was a very difficult course. That you need to do things that get information across in an entertaining manner, or in a manner that your students are going to remember. And in the old days, if you could tell a boring lecture because everyone was watching. I always made a point of trying to make my lectures, stay animated, be excited about the topic, but also, don't show off the fact that you know all of this terminology. Try to explain things and bring everybody along. And I think that really translated to when I started to write nonfiction popular science books. That I didn't want to show off the fact that I knew big words. I wanted to be able to explain things. So I explain how heart valves work by going, it's back into the, and I explain it like it's like having a dog on a leash that runs all the way to the open gate, but he's not allowed, he can't go any further. But if you have a problem, then he can get out and go back into the, go out in the street. That's like a bad valve. It opens up in the wrong direction, allows the blood to go back into the atrium. So that's the type of thing that I've always been interested in doing, is to sort of taking, I'm thinking about the stuff now that's in there. A full closet is how, with holes in it, is how I describe diffusion, which was something that as people was like, oh, that's diffusion. Kind of intriguing to take stuff that was complex and make it interesting and make it funny. And when you're writing a book about cannibalism, you have to sort of pick your spots. But I think I like doing that, and I think my readers have been really positive about it in their responses. Now, the second part of the question is something that I think is very different, and I've written a lot of for a lot of peer-reviewed journals, not recently, but when I was starting out, before I was writing books, and it's a very, very different. They are not interested in humor or emotion. They want the facts in a way that can be read and absorbed quickly, clearly, without any sort of emotional input, or this is the sort of, this is the author's opinion about this, and it reminded him about when he was a kid. None of that really works in these peer-reviewed books, but they're not written for, they're just not, they're not written for general readership. And so this was part of what I was able to do. So on one side you have all of this academic stuff, and it's very straightforward, and it's written for people. And then on the other side of the spectrum is all this kind of like sensationalized garbage. And so when you get into the middle and you can tell good science stories in an intriguing way that doesn't use a tremendous amount of jargon, I think that's something that I've been doing. But it really, in my mind, and in most, I would say in 99.9% of the scientist types that I know would be saying the same thing. They're not reading these for entertainment value. They're reading them to see what's on the field that they're interested in.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, there's still a delay and a glitch, so I'm probably catching up to the end of your question. There's a great phrase that I love to use that you allude to here. I can't remember who said it, but it's never underestimate people's intelligence, always underestimate people's vocabulary. So my next question, and I love thinking about biomimicry and how we can mimic the natural world to improve things like health, medicine, technology. So in reading this book, I came up with all kinds of imaginative predictions about where things might head, and I'm sure you have too. So I wonder, what animal adaptations, maybe even some that you mentioned in the book, do you think are ripe for biomimicry in biotech? Say you mentioned antifreeze in the blood of some fishes. I'm talking about examples like that.
Well, okay, so that example is that's probably not the one that's going to lead to medicinal breakthroughs, but it's kind of funny because the antifreeze. So this ice fish lives in the Antarctic, and it's got antifreeze in its blood, and so and zebrafish, because they do have clinical applications. But these guys, hold on one second. I sort of blanked on when I was going to talk about. Oh yeah, ice fish. So they got this antifreeze in their blood, but they don't use it so a company figured out, oh wow, there's an antifreeze that allows these guys not to freeze in this icy water, but they use it in making ice cream. And the reason is when ice cream, if you've ever had ice cream and it melts and then you put it back in the freezer, it gets these crystals in it. And so cream, it was when you just open up the carton, it keeps this antifreeze substance that they put in ice cream when they're producing it, keeps ice cream from refreezing into large crystals, which is kind of what happens in the ice fish. But the two that I think are the most interesting for the future of cardiac medicine, one of them is the common zebrafish, the tropical fish that you've seen. Anybody who's had a tropical aquarium has probably seen these. And somebody figured out, and you got to wonder who did this first and why. You cut 20% of the heart off, it will grow back into a completely functional heart. It clots really quickly. The structure builds back up as far as the connective tissue that is in a sense, the skeleton that the cells, the muscle cells are built on. All that grows back really quickly, and the fish is fine. Now, the idea here is that you don't see that in humans. And, since we've outlawed gladiators and those guys, there's not a whole lot of like hearts being chopped in half. But yeah. But it is coronary, it becomes and the blood flow down to this one area of the heart that vessel usually supplies is cut off, then that tissue dies if it's not resupplied really quickly. And when it grows back, it's not contractile. It's not part of this beautiful pumping mechanism. It's more like scar tissue. And that's really a problem. And that's something that has not been solved. So some scientists are going, what is it about the zebrafish heart that enables it to rebuild functional heart tissue? Others are taking a different tack. They're taking cells from somebody who has a heart problem, let's say. So they're not going to have a problem with rejection. That's the key here. Stimulating those stem cells, stimulating cells in the skin to become stem cells, then stimulating those stem cells to become muscle cells, and then embedding them, putting little patches onto the heart. And that's starting to work as well. So these are technologies that we think, 10 years from now, maybe less, we might be seeing. And the one that I found really intriguing is the Burmese python. A big problem in places like Florida. In places like the Everglades are falling through the floor because people have released their Burmese python pets when they got too big. And now they're these huge creatures with no predators. And there are a million of them there, and they're eating everything. And what they found, though, is that when a Burmese python eats a meal, and this is a large meal, they eat something that's 40% of their body weight, that their heart grows 40%. And when you think of enlarged heart, we have a negative connotation there because we think that's a pathological condition. But snake hearts, when they grow 40%, that's beautiful heart tissue. That's not enlarged heart pathology. So they're trying to figure out what it is and they figured it out that there are substances in the python blood that enable the heart to grow quickly. Now, so that's not to say, so I talked to the researchers and they said, we're not going to be proposing that people don't exercise after a cardiac event, and we tell them they need to exercise, or to exercise if you haven't had a cardiac event to keep your of the condition, their physical condition. So you might be able to get heart growth without exercise. And so that's the hope here. So those are the real, as far as biomimicry, those were the things that I thought were important and coming down the pike. And I talk about them in the book.
Those both sound really, really promising. Okay, so I have some good news and some bad news. Bad news first is that we are going to actually cut this short because the glitch has been pretty problematic. The good news is that you've now teased your audience so well with only hearing partial answers that they're going to have to read this book, because now they're going to be dying to know what they missed. So we're going to ask one last question. And that is one that I think you and I both like, which is, you are a zoologist and an author. I want to know, if anything, what have animals taught you about writing and the creative process?
Great question, and one that I'd never heard before. And so I had to think about it a while. And I guess what I came up with is that when I see something that is odd and peculiar, which I've now encountered throughout my research career and now as a writer of popular fiction, when I see interesting subjects like that and interesting to get that sort of excitement and get that information across to people who may not know about vampire bats or might not know about python hearts, and so I think that's it. I find that these creatures are really stimulating, and just the same way I find that ancient history and the history of medicine in this instance stimulates me to want to write about it in a creative way, and certainly I'm enthused about the prospects for medical research related to the heart.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and in this book, I'd like to mention that you do incorporate a lot of history, not just of medicine, but human history, social history. I learned about why women stopped wearing long skirts during the era of consumption. So there is just so much here. Every chapter is full of a treasure trove of fun facts and also really important health information. So I congratulate you for educating me a lot. Even as someone who works for a department of surgery, I learned a lot reading this book.
Oh, thank you very much. That makes me feel really good. Thank you.
Great conversation. Yeah, the glitching was a little, so like you said, Tiffany, people out there will just have to read the book. But I love, Tiffany, when we were in the green room, you were talking about how what you discovered in the book, you were like, look what I learned today. I think that's so fantastic for somebody like you that can learn something every day, right?
That's right.
So Bill, real quick, one final thing, and hopefully we can hear what's happening. What are you working on next?
I'm writing a book about the natural history of teeth. So
wow.
I'm going through so medieval dental practices are yeah.
We don't want to know, or maybe we do.
So there are a lot of interesting topics there, and so we know ancient life had to do with teeth, because they are by far and away the most preserved vertebrate fossil. So there's just so many stories that I'm working on now, and I've gone back now and up to a couple of my favorite creatures. One of them, vampire bats, and their highly specialized teeth, and also this incredibly nasty little critter called a candyroo, which is a South American catfish who swims into regions of the human body that we won't get into tonight.
We'll save that for the next conversation. Come back and talk to us about the teeth conversation.
Hopefully I'll get to come out and visit you in Warwick, because I've heard so much about your store. I'd love to visit it.
Yeah, well, the next book out, I think that would be a great idea. Tiffany, for those that are looking to find out more about you, do you have a website or social media that you like to direct people to?
Sure, you can follow me on Twitter, and I managed to nab the first Tiffany Fox account. So just at Tiffany Fox on Twitter.
Good for you, because usually there's so many iterations that people have to do because they don't get them suited up. It's like
Tiffany Fox, the hip hop star, was quite disappointed.
Maybe you could have sold it to her.
Right.
And Bill, for you, where do we want to direct people to follow you around? Do you have a website?
BillSchutt.com. BillSchutt.com is my website. But if you want to go back and forth with me, Facebook is Bill Schutt Author. And especially, so I wasn't as lucky as Tiffany, because I have Bill Schutt Books as a Twitter handle. So, so those are places where you can get a hold of me. Also on Goodreads, I have a page, and on Amazon as well.
Perfect. All right. Well, this was a great conversation. Sorry it was a little glitchy, but the book's fantastic. The link's there. Tiffany, thank you for your time. Bill, thank you. Always great hosting you. So
Yes,
Well,
and
thank
go
you.
and pick up a copy. You won't be disappointed.
Tiffany, it was great to meet you, and Julie, nice seeing you again.
you too.
Likewise.
Good night,
Take care.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.